What's up, YouTube? This is Gresnick, and welcome back to another reaction video. Today we'll be reacting to the first 24 hours in the Trevor Henderson universe by Mr. Mirage. Mirage. I suck at pronouncing stuff, okay? I reacted to one of his videos a long while ago. I believe it was Your Life in the Trevor Henderson universe, which I really liked that video. So I'm excited to see this one. It came out earlier today. I'm excited for this. As always, like and subscribe to Mr. Mirage and myself, and let's get into the video.
Listen carefully. Very soon things are going to change. Creatures will enter this world unlike anything anyone has ever seen. When they do,
Alright,
most of humanity will be wiped out. You must heed this warning, or you will most likely be the victim of one of the
makes sense. Too late.
The aftermath of these creatures may be the worst fate that you could possibly encounter. Picture an entity that forces freak accidents on random victims, or a two-headed clown that lives deep underground. You may think, it wouldn't be that bad, or I'd just be strapped to the teeth and I'd make it, but I don't think anyone actually realizes just how bad it would be. In this video, I'm going to be going over the first week of living in the Trevor Henderson universe, starting with the first few minutes. Let me know down in the comments what's the last thing you'd want to see when first entering the Trevor Henderson universe. It's a Tuesday afternoon and you're finishing up a class, when you start to notice a large amount of birds on the outside of the window, swarming and almost running away. Something is up, but for now you have to get home. Walking through the halls, you notice they are mostly barren. God knows where everyone went, but it's starting to really mess with your head. Come to think of it, the library that
I love these videos so much because of the storytelling. The storytelling is already really good. I also really like the No, I'm Not a Human gameplay playing in the background. It's
you were
very
studying in was a little bit
nice.
sparse today. Could everyone have gone home? Regardless, I think it's time you should join them. So you begin to walk out the front of the school, only to start hearing a school bell behind you. And that wouldn't be so weird, except it's way past the end of the day. And to make it worse, it just
Oh.
keeps repeating over and over again. It ends up being a lot more terrifying than you could have ever imagined it was. It takes a second to figure out what you're looking at, but it's unmistakably an incredibly large school bell peering over the top of one of the buildings, staring in your direction. In a confused panic, you run in a random direction away from the school, but this is one of the worst mistakes you could possibly make, as this is very far from the last nightmare that you're going to encounter.
Mm.
Okay, so before I move on with this guy's specific scenario, I want to go ahead and back up and go over what would be going on as a whole right now. Starting with the giants that people would begin to see off in the distance, noticeably causing a little bit of a panic. On top of this, gigantic storms and other natural disasters would likely be coming along with them, some of which I'll be going over in detail more later. Regardless of this, everyone would be trying to evacuate the cities and all the other areas where they are approaching all at once, causing massive traffic jams and a lot of chaos. Almost as if they were trying to evacuate like a tornado hitting the city. But in a weird way, that's basically what's going to happen. Some giants would even be appearing as if they were coming down from clouds. In some cities, fires would be breaking out, filled with the wildfire giants, and in the worst cases, it would appear like the cities would be entirely wiped off the map. But the sight of them alone would cause more panic than most people realize, as many people would be just struggling to comprehend what the hell was going on. And the worst part is the crowding of all the highways that would be caused by the panic would make everyone stuck on the roads, and it would become extremely easy for a certain gigantic worm. So now that we've gone over that, I want to return back to
Yeah.
our example, who is unfortunate enough to still be blissfully unaware on what is happening. On the walk home, though, everything would start to become unmistakably weird, and there's no way you could not figure out that something crazy was going on around you. For example, you would begin to see
Okay.
stuff like giant piles of trash bags just sitting on the street or areas around you where they really shouldn't be. And then, no matter how far you walked, they would just keep appearing in front of you or around you, almost as if you're saying the exact same pile again and again. But as most people know, trash doesn't move on its own, so this would be impossible. Except for the fact that this is not trash. Rather, the disturbing creature Mr. Bags, who is designed to look similar to common trash, only to devour people who get too close. The sight of this, understandably, would send you into a panic, but lucky enough, you were only like a minute from your house. But trust me, it's about to get
Mm.
a whole lot worse. By the time the first few hours have hit, people have likely begun to die en masse. The giants have begun their damage, killing thousands. Entities like Cartoon Cat have likely at least claimed a few dozen by now, and with the highway and bridge worms basically having a field day, it's safe to say things are getting really bad. On the flip side, however, the
Uh,
government is likely trying to get this under control, but honestly, how can they? These incidents would start being broken up into two categories. One being the very big, obvious ones that it would be requiring a majority of the firepower and with that collateral damage. And then the ones that are a lot more small and isolated, hiding themselves in areas and then ambushing people. But that's assuming that all of these things are, again, their own species instead of just each being one entity in one location, so it'd be a lot more widespread. Unless it's something like Cartoon Cat that can essentially be everywhere at once, anyways, so it doesn't really need to be more than one. But it's not just city areas. Rural areas would also be hit almost as hard, with trucks being picked off by country road creatures and livestock being threatened by the Red Witch, who Trevor himself gave the caption stating, "It's in the field again, go check on the cattle," leading me to believe that it's a reoccurring blight in these rural areas. Police would
uh,
understandably be overwhelmed with all the calls they're getting of people being attacked by various different entities, and most of them would just give it up and go home to protect their own families. With the military having a very similar predicament, but instead being preoccupied with, the giant problem, too much to be able to help anyone else with any of the other predicaments going on. Regardless of this,
makes
I'm willing to
sense.
bet a sort of EAS alert would be announced to the public, telling people to shelter in place inside of their homes. If only that would make them safe. In a panic, you would probably just get home and begin barring the windows and doors, not realizing that something could already be inside. Before you cover the last window, you notice that, hey, at least some of the wildlife seems to be surviving, as you're able to catch a glimpse of a deer outside one of the windows. Oh god, maybe it's better we don't look outside. But watching the TV isn't much hope either. Do not go outside for any reason. It would be better to starve to death than to let one of them catch you. Huh, go figure. But right as that last word hits, you hear something rummaging around in your cabinets. A large hand jolts across the floor and then back into the darkness, confirming your worst fears that something has already made it inside. Well, it seems like our friend here has got this all figured out, so we'll check back on him later. While this situation
Oh.
might seem like a horrible example, it's just one of many that would be going on all at once. People will be discovering things in their basement, in the alley next to their house, but let's take a second to figure out one of the worst locations that you could have been when this all started.
Yeah,
Now,
you're
at
not
first
doing very
glance, the
hot.
woods seems like it would be one of the best locations that you could go during all of this. However, it wouldn't
The
take long
Siren
to
Head's
realize that
resting
this is a
place. Yeah,
giant
great
mistake
idea.
due to just the sheer amount of entities that would be roaming around here. I want to start with the most obvious of which being the threat of Siren Head, who I'm sure everyone
It's
knows
my
about at
boy.
least a little bit. But Siren Head, for those who don't know, primarily is going to wait in the forest making alarms to lure people in. The worst
Hmm.
part is, in a situation like this, alarms would be going off a lot regardless to warn people about the outbreak of these entities, meaning most people wouldn't think twice when hearing a warning siren in the woods. And by the time they
Yeah.
did, most would already be dead. Now, I don't think people realize how, devastating it would be if these things existed in the woods and were just these apex predators of humans. Because think about it
Yeah,
this
they're
way:
a big
Siren
problem.
Head is incredibly fast to the point of being able to catch up with a speeding car. Not to mention, he could probably kill you almost instantly if he caught you. And I can also assume he can detect you from extremely far away. Think about it this way: being in the woods with Siren Head is kind of like being in the Arctic around a polar bear, who, for reference, is still only like a third of Siren Head's size, but still has a
Yeah.
90% chance of killing you, even if you're like a mile away. So imagine what your chances would be against Siren Head, not to mention the other entities like the precursor of the First War, whose name alone already interests me, but not enough to be within 100 miles of this thing. Regardless, it appears to be a forest giant, and therefore another thorn in your side. Well, a thorn in the sense that rather than being a mild annoyance, it destroys your entire bloodline, if that paints a better picture. The forests
It
already
destroys all your
contains enough
blood.
cryptids and mysteries without being in this universe, so you can imagine all of them being a complete red zone. But in the first few hours, people are still kind of mentally lost and disconnected from reality when you're all the way out here. So you would be forgiven for not noticing what's going on, especially if you were camping in the middle of the boons. But post noticing a creepy stalking creature or two, you should begin to realize that something is a tad fishy, and that would be
Yeah.
likely the hag coming out of the nearby lake and devouring a few children. Okay, it's been a few days now, so let's check back in with our homebody situation. Let's say you're a bit lucky and loaded a couple bear rounds into that home invader, as every red-blooded American should, and meandered your way into the attic. Here you have a sort of window that you can now see outside again. So let's see what's going on out
Better
there.
light up your attic.
And the curtain goes down. Within a few days, the government would likely begin to put together a sort of survival list. Hell, if I can do it, they can. But anyone who's seen any sort of analog horrors like this would know that they're never really that good, and people would still continue to die en masse. So, with nothing
Yeah,
really
makes
to do
sense.
but sit here, you would just lay your head down for a brief rest. Okay, so you're probably wondering how it could be humanely possible to fall asleep with the massive amount of entities roaming around your neighborhood and likely even inside your home. Well, to be honest, if you even want to have a chance, you're going to need to put something comforting to distract you. But that usually emits blue light or is uncomfortable to wear in headphones, which ruin your rest. But don't worry, because I can put you onto the best sleep mask that you can buy. The Manta
Ooh,
Mask by this video sponsor,
sponsor
Manta
time.
Sleep. Every mask provides the perfect balance of incredible, only to have the most peculiar dream.
I accidentally skipped his
MIRAGE.
code.
Now back
Yeah, he used this stuff to support him.
to the video. Only to have the most peculiar dream. You don't know why, but something is ushering you to choose one of these 5 disturbing candidates. Option number 1 appears to be hiding behind a trash can, making muttering noises. You don't know why, but you think it has something to do with Burger King. Option number 2 appears at the end of a long hallway, nearly 7 feet tall. Following them up, number 3 seems to enjoy a woodland getaway, if you could call it that. Option 4 is, option. Finally, option 5, apparently he wants your jawbone. Before you can figure out
Huh.
the implications of all that, you wake up to the noise of another humanoid outside your window, this time having a sort of surreal, inhuman movement, almost as if they're being manipulated by some sort of string. And it's almost as if it's offering a hug of sorts. Yeah, hard pass. But it seems like your problems may be a lot bigger than you expected. Hopping
Yep,
back
the
over to the
puppeteer.
woods, I'd like to give an estimation of around 80% of campers or survivalists have been cut down already, but there's always
Makes
people who
sense.
are insanely crafty that stay alive somehow. So your best bet would honestly be digging something underground, then putting a large amount of brush over top of yourself, and hoping something large doesn't just cave your head in. You could also technically leave, but as I mentioned earlier, cars make you a giant target from more things than one, especially the entity labeled
Yeah.
Slid Down the Clouds, that contains many almost crab-like arms and squid-like tentacles. Based on the name, I can only really imagine what this creature does. But my best guess is if you try to go anywhere near it, you may get a one-way vacation into the atmosphere. Sometime very soon, a majority of people will begin running out of basic amenities, and dehydration will begin to set in. So at this point, how many people have exactly been wiped out? Well, to
Most.
start, by reasons simply like panic, car accidents, dehydration, fires, etc., you'd be looking at the non entity death toll around 200,000 to 400,000 in the US alone. But once you add Trevor Henderson entity kills into this equation, it would nearly triple. And we'd be looking at almost a million deaths, which with millions more worldwide. With the nights being far worse than the days, as majority of the entities are more active at night. Not to mention the night-specific ones, with hundreds of that isn't a moon and like creatures roaming the streets and devouring everyone in sight. The roving moon being another similar nighttime entity with almost a light like bulb as a face, towering over houses and running on all fours. It's safe to say that if you see
Yeah.
light, run for your life. When it comes to the giants, we can only hope that at least a few have been neutralized by now, but at the same time, smaller cities with less military focus have likely been turned to rubble. Not to mention,
Makes
I'm
sense.
sure at least someone in the government has been recommending carpet bombing what they call lost cause cities, so that's going to be even more deaths. It's safe to say
Uh,
humanity probably isn't winning this. as it's basically like the Mist movie times 100. And being almost a week in, we're gonna have to start dealing with an entirely different set of problems. Mainly that all of our cars are gonna be out of gas, you're gonna be out of water, out of food, and things like dehydration are gonna seriously start to set in. The people who are still alive by now likely have had some sort of disaster prep going on. But even most of them are going to start to realize that they're going to need to start looking for food. Lucky for them, though, many grocery stores are likely not going to be insanely empty, as most people that were going for them early on would just be massacred. The only problem is that even if you do make it to the store, you're throwing the dice on whether you're going to run into the stranger, which is an albeit odd looking creature roaming shops and essentially destroying your mind once you're inside, making exits seeming distant and impossible to find, causing dizziness and hallucinations, all while he will randomly show up around the store. Now, it is going to be unknown whether this creature will actually kill you personally, or whether it'll just confuse you so much that you die of dehydration while wandering around the store for days. But regardless, if you are just like kind of wandering around the store, I wouldn't be surprised if something crazy takes advantage of the fact that you're delirious and takes the liberty of putting you down. If you do get lucky, however, and find a store
Yeah, you're
without
gonna
something
die.
undesirable inside, you would be forgiven for just barricading all the doors down and deciding to just live in there, since it does have the most resources and the easiest ability to stay alive. But what about those left to live in the forest? After weeks, it's fair to suggest that you would have to find some wild game if you expect to be alive this long. To make things even worse, in the wilderness, you would need almost double the normal amount of calories due to weather and the extra effort for, say, shelter building and sprinting for your life. And
Yeah.
honestly, I'd be surprised if you went like 10 minutes without hands trying to grip you from behind trees or a flying head rushing you. Even things like birds can be a horrible idea to stick around due to things like the dove, who, as horrific as it sounds, possesses a sort of dove or pigeon looking like face that is used to lure hungry hunters in, thinking it's just a quick meal, only to actually be a much larger creature hiding behind it in the dark, kind of like an anglerfish. And the dove would be
Uh,
killing many survivors like this. Not to mention, the deer I mentioned earlier is actually one of 4 found footage creatures, with another being labeled the passerby at night, which is a very large creature that is assumed to be very fast, possessing about 6 legs. I would assume these also could pose major threats both in the woods or if you tried to escape. Even Trevor stated that after wandering over the road in the picture, it disappears into the woods. But after a few weeks, this wouldn't be your biggest issue. As I don't know if any of y'all remember, but at the beginning of this video, I mentioned a large amount of natural disasters signaling the appearance of the giants. Well, out of the disasters, one type of giants, being the wildfire giants, tend to show up on wildfire cameras in the presence of these huge fires. And with no one to put them out, and the government being mostly focused on bigger threats like the wandering death or other destruction giants, these fires could easily envelop the entire woods around you, forcing you to flee into the nearby countryside, getting rid of any cover that the forest might have provided for you. In the distance, you would see what looks like almost 10 different heads smashed together, and more eyes than you can count. But despite this giant size, this time all of them are on you. I think it's clear by now the forest might not have been the best way to survive this whole thing, but was it
definitely.
really a good option? I mean, I couldn't
No.
imagine, like, for an example, hiding in like an abandoned location or something. There really isn't anywhere where you'd be completely safe. And by this point, I would just imagine most people are going to die. But regardless of this, it isn't really something that's just going to go away after a certain period of time. We're going to need to find a way to integrate this into a sort of new norm. So, how exactly would this look for
Makes sense.
humanity coexisting with these creatures so we don't go extinct? Now, coming in contact with these Trevor Henderson entities would honestly decimate everyone involved, from cities,
Hmm.
rural areas, forests, and especially suburbs. Within weeks, at least 20 to 40% of humanity would be completely wiped out. And those who remained would have to be carefully calculating each and every decision, as one wrong move could be their last. So, how do we even continue living at this point? Well, starting with the giants, they would have to be timed and watched ahead of time via some sort of radar system to evacuate the areas completely ahead of their arrival. Damage to cities
Yeah, I
would
mean,
be
that's the only way
inevitable,
you could really
but
avoid
as is
them.
the same with, like, say, hurricanes or earthquakes, the key would be keeping the death to a minimum so that rebuilding could be made easy. Even Trevor himself stated this when referring to the bird watcher. It's amazing what people can and will adapt to if given enough time. They had the evacuations down to science by now, and even with an emergence, the fields kept them from doing any major damage, and they didn't even have to stop the trains this time. He wouldn't be late after all. This shows that even canonically, Trevor himself admitted that the Giants could be dealt with and predicted to avoid any major catastrophes every single time they decided to show up. Well, except for like the behemoth, but there should only be one of him. But to be honest, the
Yeah,
Giants would be the easy parts. The most difficult things would be how overwhelmed and swamped the police would be having to deal with all the attacks from the smaller entities. And in my opinion, the only way this would even make sense is for a more in depth survival guide to be handed out to every single person so they could deal with things without having to involve law enforcement every single time. For example, if any of you guys remember my survival video, the anxious dogs respond to how you act. So if you act like they're your pets and not horrific abominations of God, they will often reciprocate that and not be a threat. This will often include barricade techniques and engineers that specify in securing your home against these things, and panic rooms in case something really bad went wrong, which it very well still might, especially with literal deities like the god of roadkill and Cartoon Cat running around, who both essentially cannot be stopped no matter what. Bridges would also likely have to be inspected or rebuilt, so bridge worms would be unable to use them as ambush spots, kind of like how in some cities, how pigeon spikes are set up so birds can't perch there. Police would likely have to set up a sort of Mandela catalog situation where they would have to be identifying exactly what is attacking someone to know the difference between something that
uh,
can be helped or from people who will be long dead by the time they get there,
yeah, that makes
which is
sense.
kind of unfortunate for the caller, but it's what has to be done. But the alternative is losing the entire police force to like Cartoon Cat or something. Areas like forests and abandoned buildings would be considered dead zones, so if anyone is stupid enough to go there, they would not be able to be helped. I honestly
Yeah, that
think
makes
driving
sense.
would become far too dangerous as well. It would have to be somehow modified or replaced with something else, like trains, because if you hit any sort of animal or living thing in general, it would end in your death due to the god of roadkill. And the man with the upside down face would purposely be causing freak accidents, and I could imagine every time you get behind the wheel, there would be a serious chance tons of people would be dying. Not to mention the damage leaving your car on the road somewhere would likely have. But on the bright side, we also have the benefits of the friendly creatures such as Longhorse to occasionally warn us of danger, not to mention how cool some of these creatures would be to look at. I feel like over time people would adapt and start to not die as much, and at bare minimum be able to get food and water consistently again. But this would
Yeah,
take
that makes
years,
sense.
and during these first couple years, civilization as we know it would take a gigantic hit. And honestly, this is just being optimistic, as it's very possible we would just be completely wiped out and none of this would end up happening. But me personally, I would hope for the other route. I hope you guys enjoyed the first episode of new 24-hour format. If you guys want to see more episodes, make sure to leave like and comments below so I can sort of gauge the room on what you guys like. And if you haven't already, consider dropping a sub because I want to get to 100K by the end of this year so I can do like a cool Q&A for you guys.
All right, great video, just like the last one. Both very interesting. There are some really well stories. Oh, what the hell did I just say? It's very good storytelling. Especially in the last one. This one's a little bit less since we heard from the guy like 3 times, I think. But it's still good. And most of this is correct. And sounds legitimate, honestly. Well, that was a great video. As always, like and subscribe to myself and Mr. Mirage. And I will see you next time. Goodbye.